This week, I release the UI Toolkit, which is a companion app for UniFi Network that sort of brings some of the tools that are harder to find within UniFi to a nice, clean, simple interface. So if you would like to install this for yourself, and by the way, thank you to everyone who has already contributed to the project by reporting issues and suggesting changes and whatnot. I really appreciate the feedback, and you can find the whole project over at github.com/crosstalksolutions/UniFi Toolkit. And I'll have a link down in the description as well. But how do we actually get this thing installed? Let me walk you through it. It's actually quite simple. All right, if we start over here at the GitHub page, you can read about the various tools that I've built into this application. And then here we have our quick start. So the best and easiest way to run the UI Toolkit is with Docker, and it's also the easiest way to update it if, as new versions are coming out, which has been almost every day as I've been working through the various issues and bug fixes and whatnot. If you have Ubuntu 22 or 24 and a fresh, clean version, you haven't installed Docker yet, you can go to this link right here, the installation docs, that gives you a full walkthrough of how to install Docker onto a clean version of Ubuntu. Now, if you don't have Ubuntu, you don't have Docker, you can do this same thing with Windows using Docker Desktop. I also created a version for Synology Container Manager. So if you go into the Container Manager and just search for the UniFi Toolkit, you're going to find it, and I have instructions for that down here as well. If you search through the documentation, here we go, Synology instructions right there. And someone even created instructions for how to do the same thing with the QNAP NAS devices as well. So plenty of different ways that you can install this, and you can even just run it straight Python if you want to. But for this video, we're going to install it in Docker. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing we want to do is clone the GitHub repo into our Ubuntu. So this is a clean instance of Ubuntu that does not have UI Toolkit installed right now. So we're going to say git clone and then the GitHub webpage. There we go. It has downloaded it. Go into that directory, and we just say /setup.sh. And that's it. Okay, so what this is going to ask us, there are two different ways that we can deploy the UI Toolkit. Local, meaning you have this server on your local LAN and it is connecting to an instance of UniFi, like a UniFi gateway, that is also on your local LAN. Now that can be a UniFi gateway, it can be a cloud key, it can be a local version of UniFi OS server. As long as it's all local on the same LAN, you can use local. That's the easiest way to do this. That gives you an HTTP interface to the UI Toolkit. However, if you are running something like UniFi OS server in the cloud, or even the older version of UniFi Network, but hosted, you can go for a production version. And the only difference here is that the production version of UI Toolkit adds in an extra caddy Docker container with a Let's Encrypt cert. So it does a network proxy from HTTPS 443 into the local container at 8,000 and then slaps a Let's Encrypt certificate onto that. So you'll need a fully qualified domain name and all of that sort of good stuff. But we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to go with the local install. So I'm going to say 1. And now we can just say docker compose up-d. And this is going to pull the latest version from the Docker repos, and it's going to start that Docker container. Looks like it's already done. All right, so let's go over here. This is an old version I was running. We're going to refresh that, and now we have the UI Toolkit up and running. That is the name of this local server where it's running, :8000. And remember, that's HTTP and not HTTPS. So the first thing we want to do is configure our UniFi connection. And if we click in here, we can give it our controller URL. In my case, it's https://192.168.4.1. And then we want to give it the API key. So most versions of UniFi, you can get an API key to get into the data within UniFi. So if we come over to UniFi, You click right down here under integrations, or if you're on an older version, it might be under settings, control plane, and then there's an integrations tab up here at the top. But with the latest version, I think it's as of version 10 of UniFi, they moved integrations down here to its own left-hand menu item. You can see I already have a UI Toolkit API key, so I'm going to click on that and we're going to remove that one. We're going to create a new API key. I'm going to call this UI Toolkit. Copy, paste that for the description, and we're going to say create. So API key has been created. We're going to copy that key, go back to the UI Toolkit, and we are just going to paste it in to the API key field. You want to scroll down. This, by the way, you don't need to put in an admin username or password unless you're working with like a super old version of UniFi that cannot generate an API key. All right, so most people are not going to have to worry about that, but we did leave username and password authentication in there for legacy users. All right, so we're going to say test connection, boom, successful, and we're going to save config. Okay, so we are now connected. Now up at the top, we've got light mode and dark mode. If you want to change those settings or connect to a different instance of UniFi controller or UniFi Network, you can right here. And then we have a little widget up at the top that tells us our resources, CPU, RAM, etc. You can drop that down for even more information, including your WAN IP, the model of the gateway, etc. And then here we have our three main tools. So that is the WiFi Stalker. Let's start with this one. So we can say get devices. This is going to use the API to reach into UniFi and grab a list of all of your devices. And then we can just select which devices that we want to actually monitor and say stalk. And after a moment, so they start off not connected because the API hasn't reached out to those particular devices yet, but in just a moment that will refresh and those should all come online as status green. Now, the one thing to remember when you are stalking wireless devices, if you have an iPhone, okay, by default, when an iPhone connects to a wireless SSID, it randomizes the MAC address, and that is something that you actually have to disable in the iPhone so that you can keep track of it in UniFi so that the MAC address doesn't actually change. It's very easy to do that though. All right, so refresh here. We can see I've got 2 wired and 2 wireless devices. If I click on any of these, by the way, this says unnamed device, but usually it'll pop up with, iPhone or Google Pixel or whatever. So we're gonna say unnamed device. It's got all of that device's information in here, including its favorite access point, right? So which access point in your organization or in your home does this device connect to most frequently? Uptime, statistics, and all that sort of good stuff. And then down here, we've got our device analytics. So this is dwell time by access point, basically like which access points is this device spending its most time connected to. And then we have a presence pattern, which actually gives you a grid of when, generally when that device is connected and not connected to the network. Okay, you can also update the name in UniFi. That gives it a friendly name. If you want to call it like, Chris's iPhone or something like that, you can click that. That will push that information out to UniFi. And you can also even set up webhooks into Slack or Discord or just, N8N or generic webhooks in order to see or be notified when devices connect or disconnect to the network and when they roam between various access points. You can also block and unblock devices through this interface right here. But again, there's no authentication on this, so be real careful about where this is installed and make sure that, that people you don't want to have access don't have access. Now again, if you install the production version with Let's Encrypt, that does give you authentication into the UI Toolkit. So again, if there's any danger of someone connecting into it, make sure you use the version that actually has authentication and is protected with that Let's Encrypt cert. All right, so then we've got the ThreatWatch utility, and the ThreatWatch utility is essentially going to monitor your intrusion detection, intrusion prevention events if it's enabled. So it should tell you via the API if it senses that IDS IPS is enabled. In my case, it says IDS mode, so I'm detecting but not preventing, but events will pop up. Now, I'm also double natted in this location, so I'm not going to get anything from the outside world, but internal devices that trigger events will show up in the ThreatWatch. And then finally, we have our Network Pulse. This is designed to be a full screen dashboard that shows you basically everything that you would want to know about the network and its health, including what's your gateway, its resources, your WAN status, how many clients, how many UniFi devices, each access point. And you can click into each access point to see details about, for instance, who's connected to it and on what SSIDs. And then various graphs with Wi-Fi information and whatnot. And this refreshes automatically. I think it's every 60 seconds. Okay, so there you have it, a quick install tutorial for the UI Toolkit. Again, I really appreciate everyone's feedback that they've been giving me on this tool. If you run into any issues, submit issues at GitHub's issues page for this project. Also, if you have any feature recommendations or if there's tools that maybe you'd like to see included in the UI Toolkit, perhaps we can build those in. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.